Um, Good morning, everybody. Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of Cabinet on Wednesday, the 13th of December from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is 9:30 a.m. My name is Councillor Martin Todd, Chairperson of the Cabinet and Leader of the Council. This meeting is live streamed from the Council's YouTube channel, and the recording will also be available after the meeting. Subtitles can be switched on, and advice on how to turn these on is set out on our website. Can everyone please ensure that mobile phones are on silent? And can I remind members to use their microphones? In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Can I welcome members of the public to the meeting this morning? We will invite you forward when it is time for you to make your contribution. Turning to the agenda, the first item of the agenda is apologies for absence. Councillor Porter is on her way, but the traffic today is rather spectacular. And there are some councillors who are aiming to come and make deputations who are also stuck in traffic. But I think they're all aiming to be here later. I'm not aware of any other apologies. The second item is membership of Cabinet bodies. We previously agreed that the Cabinet would appoint directors to Venta Living Limited, the Council's housing company. And I'd like us to agree the appointment of Councillor James Batho as a company director for the remainder of the municipal year, and Councillor Pett is the other councillor company director appointed in June 2023. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. The next item after that is disclosures of interest. Do we have any disclosures of interest? There are elements of some of the papers where there is a crossover with work of the County Council, so I need to declare a personal, non-prejudicial interest in my role as a County Councillor. Otherwise, I see no other interests to be declared. The next thing I would like to do is note the request from councillors to speak. I have requests in via email for councillors Lee, Wallace, Horrell and Godfrey. We only have Councillor Horrell here, but I will take the others on the assumption that they're stuck in traffic and will join us when they can. Next item is public participation, and Mr. Tate is here, and I believe you wish to speak on item 9. And I will call you forward when we get to that particular point in the agenda. The next item is the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 21st of November 2023, pages 5 to 12 of your agenda pack. Cabinet, can I ask you if you agree those minutes as a correct? That's no. Well,
announcements are after
minutes. Announcements are after minutes.
Yes, it is correct.
Sorry to be pedantic. That's fine. You know, changed things since your day. So our Cabinet happy to agree the minutes as a correct record.
Agreed.
Now we have announcements. And I know, Councillor Thompson, that you are absolutely champing at the bit to make an announcement. So I'd hate to think that you would miss your opportunity. So the first announcement comes from Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Leader, and apologies, I had the wrong set of agendas up on my screen. Yes, Cabinet, I'm absolutely delighted. I was delighted to attend the Beautiful South Tourism Awards last night in Brighton, together with the team from our Visitor Information Centre. They had been nominated for Tourist Information Centre of the Year, and I'm absolutely delighted to let you know that they won gold. it was a real honour to be able to go up to the stage with Sarah Harfield, who runs our Visitor Information Centre, to receive the award on the team and the council's behalf. Our VIC has really put Winchester on the map, and last night really proved that. And it was a real privilege to be with the team during their celebrations. And of course, getting to the nomination stage is really quite a feat in itself. And I'd like, on behalf of all of us here, to thank the team for putting in such a lot of work and all the effort to secure the nomination. So well done all. And just before I finish, of course, I was reminded last night that the Visitor Information Centre has lots of delightful gifts and presents. So if you're still looking for things to buy for family and friends, do pop in and see what they have to offer. And they'll be very, very pleased to show you the award, which will be on display from today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Lerny.
Two announcements, Leader. Just to your surprise. One hot off the press. But the first one is that our recycling consultation has now closed, and we've had an amazing 8,740 responses. So statistically, we've received a significant response from all age groups and property types. With over 95% of people thinking it important to recycle at home, and over 75% saying being able to recycle a wider range of material would help them recycle more. A full report will be given at a special health and environment policy meeting on the 22nd of January, and this consultation is going to be very helpful for us as we move forward with our plans to improve recycling across the district. Secondly, and as I said, this is like Councillor Thompson's hot off the presses, we have been accredited by the Carbon Literacy Project as a silver carbon literate organisation, which celebrates our commitment to tackling climate change, reducing our carbon emissions, and commitment to a low carbon future. This is a great achievement for us as a relatively small local authority, and I really would like to thank all our staff and members who've taken the training and become certified as carbon literate.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Lerny. Councillor Becker.
Thank you. Very sensitive today. It's not really a cabinet announcement, it's more for public information that the consultation on the future of the hospital launched on the 11th of December and will run until the 17th of March 2024. All the consultation information is available on the website Hampshire Together, so I urge everyone to have a look at that. There will be quite a few listening events that the Hospital Trust is going to be running. The first of those is actually today on Zoom. There is one in person in Winchester tomorrow evening at the Hope Church, and you need to register for those events on the Hampshire Together website. For the council response, we will be having an additional meeting of the HEP committee on the 31st of January, and I will be responding on behalf of the council in my role as cabinet member with responsibility for health to the consultation.
Thank you very much indeed. And I have a couple of announcements of my own. The first is that the Friarsgate demolition has moved beyond the stage of removing the internal fixtures and fittings, and I've been to visit the demolition of the building itself, with a rather alarming device that was taking huge bites out of it and gradually reducing it to the ground. So this is an important step forward in our work to regenerate the rundown parts of the centre of Winchester. Obviously, there's a consultation going on through the Central Winchester Regeneration Project and our partner Jigsaw, but at the same time we're moving ahead with changes that are needed, as we did with King's Walk, to make the the centre better for the future. And then the second thing I'm very pleased to report, jointly with Councillor Westwood, we went to visit the installation of the first extra improved sewage treatment works just north of Itchen Abbas, which will be cutting nitrates and phosphates going into the Itchen. And this is again the first of two that we're doing, but the intention is that we and others will be taking similar initiatives ongoing in order to reduce the pollution in our local rivers. So I don't think we have any other announcements. I was trying to think, Councillor Lerney, when you were making your reports, whether we ever actually formally announced that the something I was talking about yesterday at Hampshire, the council climate scorecard for all district councils highlighted that Winchester City Council was the highest scoring council in Hampshire and the 5th highest district council in the country. Although, unlike our colleagues at Hampshire, we take our rating as an opportunity to learn how to do better rather than any grounds for complacency. Anyway, moving on to item 8, which is the Winchester City Football Club artificial turf proposal. So I will briefly introduce the paper in front of us. So this project, the installation of a 3G pitch at Winchester City Football Club, is a project that we as a council have been, as an administration, have been committed to for some time. The decision in front of us today is to, for a small amount of extra funding in order to enable the project to proceed. Like so much in current life, the cost has seen dramatic pressure in the last couple of years. But the other thing that continues to see a great deal of pressure is the demand for pitch space and the huge opportunities for this pitch to enable more people to do more physical activity. And because this pitch can get many times the usage of a conventional pitch, this is going to enable a big increase in sessions for women and girls football through partnership with the Winchester Flyers, but also more pitch time for under 16s, older adults and disability fit football, which actually requires artificial pitches. Our share of the cost increase is small, but it gives us enormous benefits. So we're not having a planning meeting today, and I don't propose that we spend any significant time talking about issues that I thought were well addressed at the planning committee, which supported the proposal unanimously on November the 15th, and as well as the conditions they put in the application. So we're not discussing whether this is consistent with our planning policies. The discussion today is about whether it's a good use of the council's resources. And I think that the paper makes clear pretty unambiguously that it is a good use of the council's resources. And I look forward to discussing the paper further, hearing your questions and making an appropriate decision at the end of this session or this section. So on this, I have 2 names listed to make deputations. Councillor Lee, who I know supported the application at the planning committee, and Councillor Godfrey. So Councillor Lee, would you like to come forward and say a few words?
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak. Good morning, Cabinet. Before speaking direct to the agenda item, I hope the Cabinet will join me in not celebrating the woeful breaking news from the COP28 climate talks in the UAE. The agreement to do the transition rather than phase out fossil fuels is just kicking the climate crisis can down the road. Today, many Pacific and Indian Ocean island nations have been condemned to unprecedented uncertainty and despair, not to mention other nations and people at risk from the climate crisis everywhere. So, but getting direct to the item, in agreeing to the funding for the artificial pitch, the Cabinet should be aware, and as you already highlighted, Leader, this is not to revisit the planning committee decision, but they should be aware that we are now party to the largest source of intentional microplastics being placed into the environment. To recap, 3G artificial pitches use rubber crumb to infill with, which consists of about 20,000 end-of-life tires, ground into 120 tons of crumb and dust. The rubber crumb needs to be topped up by around 1 to 5 tons each year, which is about 1 to 4% of the total rubber crumb on the pitch. The grass blades are made from virgin plastic equivalent to 1.4 million plastic bags. Each 3G pitch weighs 220 tons. And there's only one recycling plant in the UK and Scotland, which does not fully recycle them. The EU banned 3G artificial pitches on environmental and public health grounds in September of this year, albeit with an 8-year transition period due to industrial lobbying. The ban was because the granular infill material used on artificial sport pitches is recognised as the largest source of intentional microplastics in the environment. US cities have already introduced bans, and the UK government, as you are aware, is exploring a ban. The likelihood is that most artificial pitches will be replaced with grass pitches at the end of life in 8 to 10 years' time, following the UK ban, although there are some lesser impact materials that might emerge. The environmental harm from the migration of the vast quantities of toxic end-of-life tires into the local environment and watercourses is a real concern. Our nature emergency and motion to protect our local rivers and waterways underpins the need to reinforce to the operators that their surface management plan agreed at planning under the planning application must stringently be followed to ensure protective measures are in place, and to the letter to ensure that floodwater escape with any associated toxic materials are negligible. Note the risks will never be 100%. Thus, at the end of life, we want to be ensured that, that the disposal of the products is recycled to the highest standards. So in view of these risks and issues, can I ask, in financing the business case for the new pitch, has the strongest conditioning to be attached to the business case, all relevant agreements, all contracts with the tightest protections for the environment, been agreed with the planning committee's approval for the artificial pitch? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. And Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for letting me speak. Delighted to hear. I shall not be lecturing you on the benefits of football and a plastic surface. I'm, as I always have been, fully in favour of this project, and I commend the Cabinet for maintaining their support for this funding. I'm very keen to make sure that we have a decent pitch on which the Winchester City and Winchester Flyers teams can progress up the leagues and make it through to the next levels, which playing on a plastic pitch will allow them to do. Playing on the mud, which is the norm at this time of year, on all the pitches available to the senior clubs, is not a good way to progress. We can, by delivering a plastic pitch, it is possible to have 3 or 4 games a day without damage to the surface. And I hope that the clubs involved take full advantage, and the people of Winchester get behind the respective clubs and show their support in ever increasing numbers. So thank you for supporting this project.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. And as you say, the 3G pitch is in principle usable for up to 80 hours a week, as opposed to a grass pitch 4 to 6 hours. And that is quite a dramatic difference. And one that would require us a fairly spectacular number of monocultured pitches on land that frankly we don't have available. So if we aren't to do this, it is effectively a reduction in our ability to support sport in the city. Councillor Lee raised a few points about single-use plastic and materials. I think we need to and microplastics. I think we need to quickly point out that, of course, unlike a carry bag, this is not a single-use plastic. This is a multi-use plastic. That's quite a different thing when you think about it in environmental terms, and one that needs a different type of evaluation. It's not the equivalent of a thrown away carrier bag, because the intention is that the pitch itself gets used multiple times over multiple years. That's certainly in terms of the grass that you touched on. In terms of the materials, this paragraph 7.3 outlines all the measures that are in place to manage the challenge of microplastics. And I know that obviously, as a council, we take the conditions put on us by the planning committee very seriously, and indeed, as the landlord of the site, we take our environmental responsibilities extremely seriously. I think everybody at the planning committee, including Councillor Lee, had the chance to speak to the designer of the pitch, who outlined the measures that are laid out in paragraph 7.3 and indeed several others, in terms of the containment barriers around the facility enclosure, which are built into the pitch barriers that surround the 3G pitch surface, the footwear cleaning stations, the detox units, tool gated entrances, the asphalt surfacing and paving, and the drainage inspection chambers with waste collectors in order to catch materials entering the drainage system. And indeed, I think Councillor Lee at the meeting inquired about showers and had clarification that that capture process was included for the showers as well. So there is recognition by Sport England and the Football Association that this is an issue that needs to be taken seriously. And the Football Association and FIFA have looked carefully at it, made recommendations of the kind of measures that need to be implemented, and those are measures that we are implementing. There's another very practical reason why we are going with the technology that we have in front of us today, and that is that the Football Foundation has made it clear that at this point in time, that is the only material they will fund. If we were to sort of explore alternative materials at this stage, not only would we need to cover the extra cost of any alternative materials, but we'd also have to cover the £1 million grant that the Football Foundation are due to be making, which is not something we're in a position to do at the moment. But that said, I think it's a useful reminder that this is an area of ongoing discussion, and as part of our responsibilities as a landlord, we will need to be cognizant of what the replacement programme looks like in the future. I think our intention and our desire would be that we wanted the ability to support the kind of heavy usage that we will see with this new pitch. And clearly we need to be cognizant of that as regulations and rules develop over time. I don't know if there's any extra points that Mr. Lincoln might want to add on that particular point, but I hope I've covered everything.
Yeah, covered it very comprehensively, Chair. I suppose the only other thing I'd add is that DEFRA are about to launch a research project into the sort of the longer term, the next generation, what future pitches might look like. That piece of work's due to not be complete until 2025. That will undoubtedly lead to a change in sort of future policy direction, and the timing of that, along with the sort of timing that the EU's proposed for banning the current type of pitches, would actually tie in quite neatly with the likely need to resurface the pitch that we're talking about installing now. So undoubtedly, the future future surfaces that would replace the one that we're proposing going in would be with the new and different technology, which by then will be well proven and become sort of standard policy. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. So that's useful to know. So obviously that it sounds like it will be appropriate for us when the results of that work have been done to make sure that we review the arrangements and what we consider to be adequate plans to replace the pitch at due time are properly reflected in our arrangements with Winchester City Football Club. Cabinet, does anybody have any questions that relate to this particular paper? I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Does anybody wish to debate the proposal? First of all, I think Councillor Loney's hand went up first.
Thank you, Leader. As so often, these issues are a compromise between some of the different roles which the council plays in people's lives. We are a provider of sports facilities. We also have a duty of care to our local natural environment. But when considering the nature emergency, I think it's important to say that grass areas managed for sport have very low biodiversity. And as has been said, grass pitches cannot be used extensively without damage. As Councillor Godfrey pointed out, many of our existing grass pitches are unplayable at the moment. I recently found one of our Winchester youth teams training in a local play park, as it was one of the few bits of playable grass they could find. We clearly do need to provide for more sports facilities as our local population grows. And while a 3G pitch isn't ideal, it does potentially mean that we have more land available for natural management than we would do if we were seeking to find that provision through traditional grass pitches. As the former portfolio holder, I do recognise that this is a very good project in terms of the long-term sustainability of the football club. And also does provide an excellent facility for the women's teams, the local rugby club, and a whole variety of other potential users which will come along. So I'm very supportive.
Thank you, Councillor Loney. Councillor Becker.
Thank you. I don't think it will surprise anyone to know that I'm deeply supportive, excuse me, of this proposal. The council plan itself seeks to improve health and physical activity amongst our population, and we recognise that sports facilities such as these enable our residents. At the planning meeting, we heard from one of the club members who spoke about football and the Winchester City Football Club basically saving his life through improving his mental health and the ability to be able to play football. So we can't underestimate the impact that facilities like this and the enablement of people being able to play sport has on people. This proposal will also enable the disabled football to take place. Disability football requires an artificial pitch. You can't play it on a grass pitch. Walking football, again, that will be able to take place at this facility. Again, that requires an artificial pitch. The Winchester City Football Club also intends to partner with the Winchester City Flyers to double their female team participation and to grow the youth player support. Winchester City Flyers currently has 27 teams, and with the proposed development, there will be space for approximately 3 more teams. However, that of course requires a lot more pitch time. And grass pitches are great, but as we've heard, you only get about 4 hours a week of adult use. So you can't rely on grass pitches for the provision of all of the sports that we need. Already there is great difficulty across the district in being able to find suitable space to play and to train. You know, when you're resorting to a play area, you know that things are pretty dire. And when there's a period of wet weather like this, it's almost impossible. And it just leads to weeks and weeks of cancelled games and training sessions. So having a reliable surface to play on also means that you you don't have the drop off in participation that you often have in amongst the 15 to 18-year-old age groups, because they stay in the pattern of being able to play sport and participate in the football. There's already a deficit of 3G pitches across the district, and those facilities are almost fully booked. So this is a really important development for the city and for the district. It allows more groups of people to participate in football and in rugby. You know, those with disabilities, older people, and women and girls. We've taken the environmental issues into account. We've put appropriate planning conditions on the development. So I'm very, very, very much in support of this application.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Becker. So colleagues, yeah, I mean, I think all the points have been made. I'm pleased that we've talked about the wider impacts of better access to sport. So thank you, Councillor Becker, for making that point, and also the very important linkage to mental health. That there is a very robust literature on the positive impact of sport and physical activity on mental health, particularly for common mental disorders, and we should never underestimate that and the importance of it, and the wider reasons why we as an authority are so keen to encourage sport and physical activity, aside from the obvious physical health benefits. I'd like to thank Councillor Lerney as well for once again cycling around not only on the importance with which we take the environmental questions associated with an artificial pitch, but also raising the point of not assuming that a grass pitch in place of, for example, biodiversity interventions is a necessarily better solution. You know, we sometimes make the mistake of looking at interventions in isolation and not looking at what the alternatives would be. So colleagues, we have a set of recommendations in front of us today. They are subject to successful funding applications to the Football Foundation, but subject to that application, we're asked to approve an additional allocation of £100,000 of District SIL receipts to the project, bringing total funding from District SIL to £300,000. To countersign the funding bid to the Football Foundation in partnership with the Winchester City Football Club, for them to improve, for them to get stadium improvements at the site, for an additional budget and expenditure of £461,000 funded by our £100,000 from SIL, an increased grant from the Football Foundation, and a contribution from Winchester City Football Club, bringing the total budget that we're authorising today to £1.466 million for the installation of a new 3G artificial turf pitch and associated improvements. To delegate authority to the Strategic Director of Services to appoint the contractors and negotiate and agree contractual heads of terms, and delegate authority to the Service Lead of Legal to prepare and enter into all the relevant agreements, contractual agreements, and see the completion to enable the works at Winchester City Football Club. In addition, we asked to note 4 things: that the Head of Asset Management will agree the terms of a new lease with Winchester City Football Club under delegated authority. That responsibility for operating, maintaining, repairing and replacing the pitch, including index-linked annual contributions to a pitch replacement fund, will lie with the council, but the facility and these responsibilities would be passed to Winchester City Football Club along with all income via the new lease. That if for any reason the football club were unable to meet those responsibilities, the lease would be forfeit and responsibility would revert to the council, and that the project will not proceed unless the grant application to the Football Foundation secures all necessary funding required to deliver the project in full. Cabinet, are you agreed with those recommendations and notes?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to the next item, which is property disposals at 27 Eastgate Street.
I do apologise for being late. It's a rather difficult situation outside, but I just wanted to declare my interest, just as a county councillor, in any future item that's on the agenda today. It's personal but not prejudicial.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Porter, we'll make sure that that's included in the minutes. So the next item in front of us relates to the disposal of 27 Eastgate Street. As an authority, we face increasing pressure to make maximum and efficient use of our resources. And as colleagues will remember, when we recently talked about the housing revenue account, we are now looking extremely carefully at the cost effectiveness of our spending to deliver new housing places. And effectively, what we have to look at, what we have to do responsibly with every decision we take, is look at what I would call bang per buck. The bang may vary depending on what it is that we're doing, but certainly the rate we pay for housing, the rate we pay for rooms, we'll later be discussing the rate we pay for park and ride buses, the rate we pay for carbon reduction, or any of our other council objectives are critical decisions for us. And similarly, for any investment we make, we have to look carefully at the return that we will get and make sure that we are getting an adequate return, either social or financial, for the investments that we make. And effectively, the decision that's in front of us today, as far as 27 Eastgate Street is concerned, is to say that when we look at that building, it's clear that we can get more of the benefits we need, or the returns we need to support council services, by selling this property and reapplying the capital elsewhere, rather than any kind of investment programme in this project, in this property, to bring it into use. And the financial implications section of this report outline this agreement in more detail. And indeed, this isn't the first time we did this. The paper makes reference to selling the 2 properties in Eastgate Street. I disappeared down an internet rabbit hole last night and managed to get up to 5. So numbers 9 and 17 were decided on in 2014. Number 22 was decided in 2008, as indeed actually was number 8, and number 11 as well. So we've, over the years, we have sold already 5 properties in Eastgate Street, which suggests there is a logic to our decision and a consistency with how we've looked at these particular buildings in the past. So that's effectively the choice that we're being presented with today. What is the most cost-effective way of using this resource? How do we deliver the biggest public benefit with this asset? Is it that we hang on to it and have an investment program in some way to deliver a public or financial benefit, or is it that we sell it, as we have so many other properties in Eastgate Street? That's the choice in front of us today. That's what I look forward to hearing colleagues' views on. But first, this is one where we have a member of the public wishing to make a deputation. So, Mr. Tate, would you like to come forward and make your comments?
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to address Cabinet. You may recall that at your meeting on the 21st of November, I raised questions regarding plans to spend £610,000 to refurbish 59 Colebrook Street. Today, you are considering the disposal of 27 Eastgate Street for around £675,000. It's a similar property to Colebrook Street in the central Winchester location, and I'm confused why one is recommended for expensive refurbishment and the other for sale. I've copied out the introduction to the November report about Colebrook Street, and it reads, a vacant council general fund owned property has been identified as a potential property to use to provide temporary accommodation. The property is in a good central location to enable access to training and employment and is near all the transport links. The property would enable individuals on the resettlement schemes to live alongside each other, providing support and assisting with the continued integration into our community. Bringing this property back into use will reduce the need for the council to secure emergency accommodation in the form of bed and breakfast for those households on resettlement schemes, provides a better housing option for our guests who would otherwise be threatened with homelessness. You could have written absolutely the same report about Eastgate Street. It was temporary accommodation, exactly the same as Colbrook Street. What's the difference between the two properties? You're anticipating receiving fractionally more than you're spending on Colbrook Street. It is embedded in the council's estate. It backs onto the Friarsgate Medical Centre and the bus station. You are retaining ownership of the small car park. There's no explanation in the paper why that car park, which is pretty informal, I think I've just walked past it, I know the car park well, can accommodate maybe 6 cars. Why retain that and yet dispose of 27? I consistently raised the issue of 88 Sussex Street. This is another council-owned property in the ward of the leader, split into 2, temporary accommodation. The ground floor flat has been empty for 18 months. Why isn't that being considered for disposal? It's serving no purpose whatsoever at the moment, or very limited because it's been empty. And the top floor, very large flat, Bournemouth churches have failed to evict the tenant. So I don't want to seem that I'm too negative, but there seems to be a significant inconsistency in the approach of the council. I support disposing of 27 Eastgate Street, but I cannot round that circle of the logic behind it, and certainly not the retention of that very inadequate, very small car park. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Tate. I'm glad you mentioned that you supported the disposal of 27 Eastgate Street, which makes the consistency with the last chair of Cabinet Housing, who decided on October the 1st, 2014, to dispose of numbers 9 and 17, which was, of course, you. All the more relevant opposite. Anyway, we have 2 further deputations or 2 further representations to hear. I think Councillor Lee, you wish to make a representation on this one as well? You're going to pass. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, good morning, and thank you for allowing me to speak with you at Cabinet. I completely understand the rationale in the paper for selling this property, having been party to the sale of a previous property in Eastgate Street on my watch, as mentioned in the paper. However, there are a few points of clarification that it would be helpful to better understand today, please. How will you intend to use the funds? The paper sets out options, but can you tell us today how this not inconsequential sum will be used, given you've just made the point that you will consider a better public benefit from selling the property rather than keeping it? So what is that better public benefit? We know the property has been used for temporary accommodation in the recent past and is now no longer deemed suitable. But we all know we are in need of temporary accommodation as an authority, and we know this pressure may grow just as it is on some of our neighbouring authorities in the area. We are obviously undertaking a temporary accommodation review. It would be helpful, I think, for us all to understand when will that full review be available for all of us to understand, given in this context, any properties may be very pertinent to that consideration. although I note this property is not being taken into account in that particular process. I'm also asking a similar question to that asked by Mr. Tate. Why is this property less suitable for renovation than, say, the Colebrook Street property recommended for renovation just a few weeks ago? I appreciate that was subsidised from Hampshire and other funds, not just from the council, because of its usage for the Ukrainian families. But again, it would be good to understand how you view these two properties so differently. Would it not, just given the circumstances of uncertainty that we have around temporary accommodation, be better to postpone this decision until the new year, when we have that temporary accommodation review, if that's when it's due, so that we better understand the full extent of our estate? And indeed, if we were to sell it, are we assured that we can still fulfill with all the other properties that we currently hold any unmet need for our temporary accommodation residents? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Horrell. It's completely possible I will be joining the small elite club of people who have sold properties in Eastgate Street, depending upon how the decision here today goes, or have been responsible for the council selling it, rather, I hasten to add. So a range of useful questions that have come forward. So the first question is, which we've had from Mr. Tate and Councillor Horrell, is what's different about 27 Eastgate Street as opposed to the site in Colebrook Street. The point with the site in Colebrook Street, it is absolutely integral part of our land holding around the Guildhall and the city offices. So it's a completely contiguous part of it where we currently own all of it. And it would not be sensible out of that entire site to lose one building within the contiguous whole that is currently owned and controlled by the City Council. Now, I take Mr. Tate's point that notionally 27 Eastgate Street can also be considered in the same way. And indeed, there was a careful internal discussion that also related to the car park that he mentioned as to what role it could or might play within any central Winchester regeneration project, which is effectively the parcel of land that he's talking about. And we did engage with the development partner and also make our own decision, and concluded that since the building would stay fundamentally in its current external form and usage, Longfriars Gate is a site that inherently could be included within the design for central Winchester regeneration. And therefore, we did not think it was appropriate to sell that car park site, even though it was appropriate to sell 27 Eastgate Street. I suspect from the fact that we've already sold 5 properties that if we go back in Eastgate Street, if we go back further in time, a combination of right to buy and other things suggest we probably owned more of them in the past, but that train has left the station. And both Councillor Horrell and Mr. Tate, when he was a councillor, have been involved in selling off Eastgate Street properties, and that is not something new. I'm pleased that Councillor Horrell highlighted the need for the importance of a plan for temporary accommodation. That is something that we have under control at the moment, but we are, because we know the pressures that other authorities are facing through temporary accommodation, conducting a review. I don't have the timetable for when it's expected to report. I was going to ask Mr. Hendy for that, or Councillor Westwood, depending who wishes to go first.
I will, Leader. The paper is being authored to come forward in February.
Okay, so that is a paper we will have soon. But again, and it's a very important paper, and it's a very important financial pressure that we need to understand. We are not in that position at the moment, but there are, when you talk to council leaders as to what keeps them awake at night, when you talk to unitaries and upper tier authorities, they're broadly kept awake by children's services and adult services. When you speak to some, but not all, district councils, they are being kept awake by temporary accommodation, and some coastal resorts in particular are seeing explosive growth in temporary accommodation of a kind that we are not seeing, but it is still something where we cannot afford to be complacent, hence the review that is being put in place. In answer to the question as to why not delay, I think it is our belief that if we do need to make an intervention and change the way temporary accommodation is provided, or even the supply of temporary accommodation, there will be more cost-effective options than an investment programme in the 27 Eastgate Street, which even at its peak did not deliver a particularly high number of temporary accommodation spaces. So it is something that's very much in mind, but we're still of the view that we could almost certainly deliver more temporary accommodation for the capital receipt that we're likely to receive than we would be able to by investing in that, combined with any investment that would go into temporary accommodation to enable temporary accommodation 27 Eastgate Street, that we would be able to achieve more through the proposed disposal. Mr. Tate also raised the question of 88 Sussex Street. I mean, that is outside the scope of this meeting, but I will talk to colleagues and we will come back to you with more clarity as to what we intend, what our intentions may be on that. So I hope that addresses the points made by the public and councillors. But Cabinet, are there any other questions? I think we've had good questions already, so, but still open to more, should there be any. Councillor Cutler.
Well, there was one other specific question about the use of the money.
Yes, sorry.
Which the paper makes clear there's no allocation of that fund. We have internal borrowing in the council. We have, it replaces minimum revenue requirement, and I think specifically allocating it for a specific role is not necessary at this stage. It's part of our treasury management and our management of our borrowing. It will, as pointed out here, if it replaces borrowing, it pays for itself in the same way as keeping the money in, probably to a greater extent than we can receive by investing it. So it just adds to our capital receipt reserve at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler, for clarifying that. Yes, I mean, so the intention is that we don't ring fence the money at this particular point in time, but that we consider its usage as part of our ongoing management of Treasury and capital programme. And so there will be more clarity as to what we intend to do with our capital and Treasury when it comes to the budget meeting in February, and we'll cover that in the run up to that. And the other thing that obviously we will need to be mindful of when considering that will be any outcome of the temporary accommodation review that's been done, and whether there are any capital implications as a result of that review as well. But certainly yes. Any other questions from Cabinet? No. But I think then the debate, and I notice Councillor Lurney's hand has gone up.
Thank you. I'm pretty sure I've been involved in selling a property in Eastgate Street on behalf of the council in the past too, so join in the club there. I just wanted to refer to the small piece of land at the end. I think it is important that we retain that. It does have an electricity substation next to it. We're aware that there is significant strain on the electricity supplies in the city already, and that's only going to get worse as we move forward to further electrification. of transport and heating. And I think it's important that we retain some land where we have the flexibility to be able to do something with it. In addition, it is not just around central Winchester, but we also have Winchester movement strategy aspirations, which do include potentially significant changes to that junction, and just being able to take, quite often you only need a few meters of land, extra land, to make a significant intervention, and it may well be that that land is needed at some point in the future. So I do support the sale and the retention of that piece of land.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Loney. Two excellent and important points. Councillor Porter.
As I suspected, Councillor Loney has just outlined all the points that I was going to make. I think the property is one thing, but the land is a very different piece of consideration. And we should be attempting to keep any land that's free of buildings around that area at the moment. But the property, no doubt, will be better sold and looked after by somebody else than looked after by ourselves.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other? No, so effectively, colleagues, we have one recommendation in front of us, although it includes two ideas. And from the deputations that have been, of the comments that have been made, both of them are equally important. The first is that Cabinet is asked to approve the sale of 27 Eastgate Street by private treaty or auction. And secondly, that we approve retaining the freehold interest in the adjoining open ground that is currently used for car parking. Cabinet, do you agree?
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. That's agreed. Moving on to, and I have now joined the Eastgate Street Club. So there you go, very exciting. We will now move on to the Q2 finance and performance monitoring. Councillor Cutler, would you like to introduce this paper?
Thank you, Leader. The Q2 financial and performance monitoring report is set out in the normal form that we are all used to. Covers the period 1st of July to the 30th of September, and it sets out the progress against strategic priorities within the council plan. And Appendix 2 has a financial update, Appendix 3 KPI update, and 4 Tier 1 project reports. The paper also includes the Appendix 5, which is the action notes from the performance panel meeting of the 7th of November. The performance panel has undertaken detailed scrutiny of this paper, a page turner for 1.5 hours. Details of the questions and the answers are provided. The paper is also tabled at the scrutiny committee, where updates to some of the questions from the performance panel were tabled. But of course, that scrutiny process doesn't really highlight the many positives in this paper. It's a really good report showing progress against our plans. It shows significant delivery of cost of living support, including council tax reduction, as an example, food vouchers, and significant support for our tenants. It highlights progress on our greener, faster strand, adoption of updated carbon neutrality plan, action plan in September, and the delivery of retrofit to our council homes, and continues and the work continuing on the feasibility of the large-scale renewable project. It highlights the work done on Pride and Place, completion of work to refresh King's Walk, for example, a newly referred Bishop Play area in River Park, and the new bin store in Bishop's Waltham. Financially, the council continues to keep the budget on track with a surplus against budget forecast for the end of the year. So all in all, it's a very good report showing the significant progress we are making against the council plan, and I commend it to Cabinet.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Cutler. We have two councillors who wish to say some words on this. The first is Councillor Wallace. Your parts. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, thank you for allowing me to address Cabinet again. As Councillor Cutler has already advised Cabinet, this paper was reviewed by the panel and then subsequently at scrutiny. So it's had plenty of opportunity for questions to be asked in detail. It's the final hurdle with you. My request to you, Cabinet, is twofold. Firstly, can we please fill any gaps on the targets so that when we publish the Q3 report, we do know what our targets are going to be? And if we aren't able to do that, let's say so and actually put that to one side. So if there is any further clarification, it would be good at the half-year stage, I think, to know where we're heading and which metrics we're using. The other thing that would be really helpful to the panel is to make sure we close out any still outstanding questions that were raised that weren't able to be answered on the day. Some of those were subsequently followed up at scrutiny, but there are one or two still outstanding, and it's always helpful to have that closed down before we get to Q3. So, Chair, if that's possible, that's just perhaps a request with the team. We do appreciate the officers make a huge effort, and if that could be closed down before the next quarter, that would be helpful. But as I think we're all aware, Q2 has had a thorough airing already through the governance process. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell, and thank you to you and the other councillors for your work during the performance panel and scrutiny process. Councillor Cutler, do you have any responses to the points raised?
Well, I think we can deal with both of those requests before the next performance panel. Yes.
Thank you very much. Cabinet, are there any questions from Cabinet colleagues on the paper? Any debate? Councillor Lerney.
Thank you. I think it's important to say that although it might seem on occasion that we skip through this paper, we obviously, as members of Cabinet, have gone through it very comprehensively before it hits the performance panel, so that we have had the chance to ask our questions and have a look into what's behind some of these things. So just because we deal with this quite quickly doesn't mean that we don't take it very seriously.
Thank you, Councillor Lerney. Any other comments or question? I would echo that. I would stress. Oh, sorry, Councillor Porter.
I would echo that too, actually. For me, it's a good review, and it actually poses further questions to me as a Cabinet member on what I can do better, and I'm sure it does to all other Cabinet members too. So it's a very useful document.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Porter. Yes, I don't agree, and I'm very appreciative. There's an enormous amount of work that goes into this by officers, and it provides a useful view as to the work that they've done and the progress that the council is making. Obviously, on this particular occasion, but on other occasions, I think 3 Cabinet members attended the performance panel where we went through the paper in great detail. Myself, Councillor Cutler and Councillor Westwood. So there is a lot of listening that goes on in terms of understanding the comments and questions that people have in terms of how it's done. And as others have mentioned, the process of it going through the organisation means there are also conversations. It enables conversations for us all as in our role as Cabinet members in terms of the individual items that are in there and the performance that's done. So it is a powerful tool to enable us to do a better job as Cabinet members, both the public elements where we're being scrutinised by colleagues, but also in the day-to-day work with officer colleagues. Councillor Cutler, do you have any last words?
That's rather ominous, the last words. Thank you, Leader. Yes, I think what we forget is that this is, there is a huge amount of work goes into this, and it is a huge source of information for the public as well. potentially. But it may be that the form it's in at the moment is rather daunting to anyone to look at because of the sheer number of pages, and we will continue to look at better ways of getting this information out, simply because it is such a large pack. But yeah, otherwise I think it's a very positive report, and we mustn't lose sight of the fact it does show our significant progress over that quarter.
Thank you very much indeed. So, colleagues, we are asked to, well, first of all, thank you again to you, Councillor Cutler, for making sure this is all pulled together. Thank you to our to Scrutiny and the Performance Panel for the work that they put in, reading it and challenging the progress. Thank you to Cabinet colleagues for all the work that, all of your work that's reflected in there, and to officers for all the work that all of their work that is reflected in there. So there's an enormous amount done here. I'm pleased that we've had a chance to reconsider it again today. We are asked to note the progress achieved during Q2 of 2023-24 and endorse the contents of the report. Cabinet, are you happy to do that?
Great.
Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to item 11, which is the Park and Ride bus contract and the results of the tendering for the new contract. Councillor Lerney, would you like to introduce the paper?
Thank you, Leader. Winchester's Park and Ride is a success story, providing affordable parking and reducing traffic coming into the air quality management area in the city while helping our high street thrive. I think most of us will have seen the packed Park and Ride buses and queues at the bus stops during the Christmas period, despite the council having put on more buses. Following the pandemic, usage continues to rise, and we will be looking as part of the next revision to the parking strategy at how we can modify the Park and Ride offer to encourage further switching from central car parks to Park and Ride. The outcome of this tender is also a good news story. An under budget, below inflation cost increase in the service, while cutting the council's overall emissions by 8% from April 2024, in line with our greener, faster aim. The use of hydro-treated vegetable oil gives a carbon saving of around 90% compared to diesel. And not only is HVO carbon saving, but it is cleaner, producing around 30% fewer fine particulates and hydrocarbons, 25% less carbon monoxide, and 10% less nitrogen oxide. Given the costs and, importantly, the timescales of obtaining electric vehicles and providing the electricity and charging infrastructure, switching to HVO is a pragmatic interim step, and the contract is structured to allow an early move to zero emissions buses if that opportunity arises. So I'm very pleased to bring this report to Cabinet and hope we can move forward as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Lerney. We have two councillors wishing to speak on this. I believe Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Chair. Going green can be difficult. It involves change and moving to new and innovative technologies. First impressions are that hydro-treated vegetable oil, commonly known as HVO, provides a relatively easy solution. Your vehicle doesn't need to change, it just means filling up with HVO fuel instead. The direct CO2 emissions from HVO fuel are up to 90% less than diesel, and HVO is marketed as coming from renewable sources. All great so far. However, it's not that straightforward. Rapeseed, palm and soy vegetable oils make up almost 80% of the feedstock used in EU biofuel production, with around 20% from used cooking oil. EU research has found that most of this oil demand is met by imported feedstock, strongly linked to deforestation, and that once the full life cycle emissions are taken into account, the greenhouse gas impact of palm and soy oil derived HVO can be up to 3 times greater than standard diesel. In other words, while HVO may reduce Winchester's local greenhouse gas emissions, there's a risk that the problem is simply being moved to another part of the world. Traceability and accreditation certificates through the supply process for HVO do not resolve the issue. In fact, this growing doubt and confusion surrounding the ecological credentials of HVO prompted the Environment Agency to temporarily stop using HVO fuel last year. Similarly, companies including Balfour Beatty, the UK's biggest construction contractor, have effectively banned it. Therefore, firstly, I would ask the Cabinet member, given the concerns around the sustainability of HVO, why have we already made the decision to go to HVO before this report has come to Cabinet? The report states that despite what was agreed at the June Cabinet meeting, the only option that was assessed was the use of HVO as an alternative fuel. Who made this decision and when was it made? Clearly, the long-term solution has to be to electrify the park and ride bus fleet. The report highlights two challenges to make this change. Firstly, the upfront costs of new vehicles, and secondly, the infrastructure required to charge buses. The proposed plan for addressing the bus cost is to apply for ZEBRA 2 funding through the county. But my second question is, what steps are being taken or what is being done to address the infrastructure issue? Overall, I'm struggling to understand how a decision can be made on the park and ride services when only one questionable option has been considered and without a credible plan for moving to electric buses. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wallace. Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you very much. The council can rightly be proud of the success of its park and ride service. It's one of a few schemes in the south of England which is continuing to thrive as it gets back on its feet after COVID, and we need to support that success. The report itself mentions that there will need to be a certain degree of council subsidy to as we move into the new contract, and this isn't supported by the historic and forecast costs of the scheme, which were included in CAB 3397 back in June. Unfortunately, Annex A in this report is made exempt, and I don't understand why that's been made exempt when all the details were in the public section back in June. And I think it would be sensible to include Appendix A in the public part of this, because it gives an updated story, which I presume is why the Cabinet are able to go forward with this scheme from a financial point of view. As Councillor Wallace indicated, there was no indication back in June that there was more than two options for, and neither of those two are being selected in this paper today. Reference to legal advice and procurement advice is making it too difficult to compare multiple options. Doesn't explain why we don't have any information in this paper about those options. Why are we using HVO rather than electric or hydrogen? Certainly it would be our intention to move to zero carbon solutions if it's all possible, and if there was a practical installation available. I'm not yet convinced that there is a practical installation available, and that it does have to include the financial cost of such an option. However, the paper does not give any detail of the environmental impact of HVO versus Euro 6 diesel engines or the electric hydrogen. mention of a 90% reduction is hearsay. As far as I'm concerned, there is widespread acceptance of 90% as a value of reducing output from HVO use rather than diesel use. But what's that mean for Winchester City Council? It doesn't say what 8% of our carbon output is. So what is going to happen? How many tons of CO2 equivalents are going to be removed? Well, actually, not very much, not in Winchester anyway, because the output from HVO engines is pretty much the same in terms of carbon dioxide and NOx and particulates. There's very little reduction, but we don't get that information in the paper. And we need to understand what the decision will deliver for the environment of Winchester. We also, as Councillor Wallace mentioned, need to consider what the source of HVO is. Little is produced in this country, and sources of waste material globally is likely to be in short supply as HVO becomes more commonly used fuel. Either crops grown on dedicated land for HVO production will become the norm, which will threaten or put pressure to reduce food production, increase the deforestation, or HVO prices will rise. And those options, those threats, which are not covered by the ISCC certification, are not given a mention in this paper. And I think that's a concern to the council. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Godfrey. Councillor Lerney, would you like to respond to the points made?
Yes, I think the key points are around the difference between what was agreed in June, which did approve obtaining a tender for options, including zero emissions buses and sticking to diesel buses. And the council always has had a clear aspiration to become net zero as soon as possible, and it was always the case that we will be looking at the low to zero emissions options for the buses using the diesel as a comparison. It would have been very surprising if it had come out with diesel as being the best option. The legal advice was that we should only tender for a single option, and I think officers can go into further explanations on that. Given the uncertainty of external funding for a zero emissions fleet, and following some soft marketing and looking at indicative costs and importantly the timescales for when electric buses might be available, HVO was clearly the best option to meet the aspirations of the council, as well as our budgetary needs. We did still ask for indicative costs on the other options so that we could understand the cost of switching to zero emissions vehicles and the differential between HVO and diesel. We've always been aware of the issues around HVO, and I don't know if officers might want to go into a bit of detail about how we've been looking at that. But I think what concerns me is that if we keep seeking for the absolute best outcome, we will do nothing. If we stick to diesel buses, potentially that's probably at least 2 years before we could switch to electric buses. We can see the costs of that, and there is no surety that we would even achieve it within that timescale. However, if funding comes forward, if we are in a situation where local bus companies do electrify their bus depots and put that infrastructure in place, then we have designed the contract so that we can move in that direction fairly quickly. These things, as we said earlier, there are always compromises that you need to make. I don't think we as a council would want to cover the entire cost for a private companies' bus depot to be electrified. So we do want to do this in partnership and make sure that when it happens, then it's not just the park and ride buses that are going electric, but the much wider range of buses that are on our streets. So I'll pass over to officers around that legal opinion and the certification of the HVO.
Thank you, Leader. If I can start in terms of the legal opinion around the tendering. The advice was if we tendered the three options, it would be very difficult for us to compare the three options of diesel, HVO and electric on a consistent basis that would not pose a risk of challenge from the tenderers for the council. Therefore, the decision was made to tender HVO, but to ask for prices on an indicative basis for diesel and electric so that we could comply with the original decision of Cabinet in June, which asked us to achieve prices so we could compare the costs between the three of them. As Councillor Lerney has said, clearly the June paper made clear that even a zero emission option would not be delivered immediately this April. There would be some lead-in time period for that, which another solution would have to be put in place before that could be taken up, if at all. Also, the June report made clear that the move to a zero emission service would probably be reliant on external funding via the Zebra funding programme, and made clear that, again, that would be dependent on working with the county and also bus providers. So it's not within our gift to actually control that, although we now have information via this tendering process to inform any of those bids going forward. So that was the rationale behind this, to sort of safeguard the council's position in terms of any legal challenge, ensure there was a better climate emergency response to the provision of the service in the short term, but not prejudice being able to move to a zero emission option in the future.
Thank you very much. Do you want to say anything about certification and accreditation?
I can say something about that one. We are aware of the risks around this, and so we specified in the tender documents that we will require certified sources of HVO, and we will obviously very carefully monitor this. We will get certificates from the operator as well, so we can verify that they are sustainable sources. And I think that the fact that we've included this in the tender and the operator says that they can supply it, that gets over our availability issues. So they will have secured that source of HVO over that period of time. So I think it is fairly safe, and we can certainly share with members the details of the certification and the accreditation process if that would be useful. But we will be keeping a very close eye on it.
Thank you very much indeed. Cabinet, are there any other questions that people wish to ask? Any debate? Councillor Cutler.
Thank you, Leader. I mean, it seems clear to me that both the questioning from councillors are calls for inaction, whereas what we're looking at here is a transition, not a permanent solution. Yes, I recognise the question mark about sustainability and about certification. That's one of the questions I raised very early on about how we approach that. And with certification schemes, there are always question marks, but we have to do our best on this. Councillor Lee talked earlier about the outcome of the COP28 and how disappointing it was in terms of the commitment to phase out fossil fuels, and rather the commitment is for a transition. But in this case, this is us phasing out fossil fuels directly locally and minimising it as much as possible through the certification process. It is a transition approach, so I wholeheartedly support this paper.
Any other debate? So, Cabinet, we also have a so-called pink paper, which is exempt information, which is information we can't discuss in public or on a live stream. We don't actually have any members of the public in the room. So can I have reassurance that everybody has read those sections? Are there any?
Leader, following on from Councillor Godfrey's question, can we have an explanation as to why the Appendix A is inexempt?
I was going to ask that question because looking at it, I don't see any information there that I'd like clarification as to what might be the exempt element of it. I suspect it may be the bus operator costs highlighted note 2, but I would like clarification of that.
Yes, Chair and Leader, that's absolutely right. It is the bus operator costs in there. Reason it's exempt.
So we're not in a position to talk in detail about. Well, first of all, we do have a process for de-pinking, and I think this is one which we should look at once the decision's been made, doing sooner rather than later. But the reason why Appendix A is not in the public domain is that it includes the costs that result from the tender. And we haven't at this stage made the decision on the tender. Also, while we're talking about what's in the papers, I think it's useful for public to be aware that there is also a list in Appendix B of the results of the tender from the 2 anonymised tenderers, which includes the cost of HVO fuel, but also shows the cost and capital of doing zero emission buses and the cost of Euro 6 buses running on conventional fuel. So people can be reassured that both the cabinet members and the councillors present and officers have seen and have access to that information in our deliberations. And that Appendix C is the overall evaluation of the 2 anonymised tenderers. So but what I'm hearing is that we, after clarification of that particular point, is we don't feel a need to discuss the details of those tenders, which would require this meeting to go into private session. Do people agree with that? Nobody wishes to move us into exempt session. Councillor Lerney, do you have any final comments?
No, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, colleagues, for the points raised. I'm glad that the question of traceability and certification was raised. It is outlined as part of the tender process. There's a reference to it in agenda point 7. Oh, sorry, paragraph 7.3, which explicitly addresses that. Sorry, 7.5, which explicitly addresses that point. I think it was very helpful that Councillor Cutler clarified the administration's view that this is a transition towards fully zero energy options, or zero carbon options. Not zero energy, that would be very clever. The recommendations, so this is a step forward on our desire to cut the carbon that we're using, reduce the environmental impact of the council's activities. We talk about going greener faster, and at times the word faster is going to be the driving motivator for what we're doing here. So this will enable us to cut our carbon footprint sooner, and it is part of moving as fast as we can to a fully zero carbon transport solution for everything that we're doing as a council. We have recommendations in front of us. Just double check. So the recommendations in front of us are that the strategic director be authorised to award the contract in accordance with the published evaluation criteria to the company identified as tenderer 2 in exempt appendices B and C. This is for a 5-year contract commencing April 2024 using Euro 6 vehicles fueled with HVO. The second point is that the strategic director be authorised to enter into all necessary agreements with tenderer 2, and that delegated authority, the third point is delegated authority be granted to the service lead and legal to execute and enter into all necessary legal documentation. And then the fourth recommendation, very importantly, is noting that external funding will be sought to enable a replacement zero emission bus contract in line with the ambitions to be carbon neutral, and that the contract allows for termination with a 6-month notice period after the initial 36 months to allow the City Council to procure a zero carbon service subject to funding availability. On that basis, Cabinet, are you agreed with those recommendations? Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to the last item of the agenda, which is to note the future items for consideration by Cabinet as shown on the January 2024 forward plan. Cabinet, are you happy to note the forward plan? Thank you very much indeed. I think then that brings us to the end of the meeting. All items are covered. Thank you all very much indeed for the work that was done to bring these papers forward. Thank you, councillor colleagues, for the deputations made. Thank you, Mr. Tate, in his absence, for his comments as well. Thank you to the officers for all that was done to bring today's work together. We've now completed all the business. I declare the meeting closed and wish a happy Christmas and holiday to everybody present and anybody listening. Thank you very much indeed.